So this is the first Steam Early Access game that I've ever bought, and I normally wouldn't be too proud to admit that I bought one, but at least it was only $5. The game in question is one that not too many people have heard of yet. The full title is Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex First Assault Online, which should win an award for needlessly long game titles. As you could probably guess, it's based off of the Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex anime, which is excellent by the way, and it is a multiplayer FPS developed by Nexon, the free-to-play Korean developers responsible for games like Combat Arms. You might look at this and dismiss it for a cheap Call of Duty knockoff clone, but to me it feels more like Blacklight Tango Down. The FPS combat in this game is pretty good, but it is marred by this game's utterly abysmal performance. I know it's in early access, but look at this fucking thing. Is there any universe in which a game that looks like this has an excuse for constantly dipping frame rates while running on a 980 Ti at 1080p? Yes, you heard me right, an NVIDIA 980 Ti at 1080p. When I first tried the game, I was running it at 144 Hz, on the assumption that it would not be an issue to do so, but nope. So I turned it down to 60 frames, and I was still getting constant FPS dips and fluctuation, to the point where it was so stuttery and jarring that I had a hard time playing the thing. Eventually, I just gave up and dealt with it, but when I went onto the Steam forums for the game, I saw many other people are having the same problems that I am. One explanation I saw was that this game runs on an old version of the Gamebryo engine that is not optimized for multi-core CPUs. It's the same engine that's the backbone of Fallout 3 and Oblivion, two more games that have infamous issues with multi-core CPUs. I don't know if this is the real source of the problem, but it's the only explanation I found so far that makes any sense whatsoever. Don't worry, I'm not going to do any more complaining about the performance, so let's move on to the visuals. If you're not using my video as background noise, you've been staring at the gameplay for a minute or so now, and it doesn't take a degree in 3D rendering to come to the conclusion that First Assault Online isn't doing anything extraordinary in the graphical department, which is acceptable for what will eventually become a free-to-play game. But they have the Ghost in the Shell license to work with, so maybe the art direction is unique? No, not really. There's a few spider tanks littered around some of the maps, and I guess the maps look kind of cyberpunkish, but if they didn't play scenes from the anime before each match, I would easily forget that I was playing a Ghost in the Shell game if it wasn't for half the player base running around as Modoko. Overall, it's a rather missed opportunity when it comes to use of the Ghost in the Shell license, at least visually. I've already compared this game to Blacklight Tango Down, but what First Assault really reminds me of is Killzone Mercenaries on the PS Vita. Now bear with me now, it's actually quite frightening. Everything from the actual feel of combat to the visuals and even the way you earn currency to get unlocks is freakishly similar. I'm willing to chalk up the similarities to pure coincidence since Killzone Mercenaries was on the PS Vita, and as such I'm probably one of the 10 people that actually played it, so I can't really imagine a developer trying to copy such an odd and obscure game. If you haven't played either Killzone Mercenaries or Blacklight Tango Down, the shooting in First Assault Online is pretty much what it looks like, but it's a tad slower and clunkier than your average Twitch shooter like Call of Duty. The unique gameplay twist in First Assault is a Destiny super-like mechanic, where players pick a class that has an ability that charges up during matches. It does differ from something like Destiny though. There's two tiers of charging your ability. The first tier gives you, and only you, the ability. The second tier, which takes much more time to charge up, will give you the ability for more time, but also let your allies link up and siphon the ability from you as well. Do note that there are some abilities that have been added more recently that you can't share with your team, but the second tier granting more than the first is still present for those abilities. The abilities really run the gambit too. In particular, there's this new one that they just recently added that lets you put up these walls that make players invisible when they are on one side. And while we're still on the topic about abilities, please don't feel forced to pick Modoko just because you want to play as her. I see everyone, myself included, playing as her when her ability cloaking is one of the most boring ones you can get. Rest assured that you can unlock her later down the line. You're allowed to unlock more than one class. First Assault also features some light, I guess, RPG elements in addition to the abilities. There's a currency and unlock system, like I mentioned earlier, that lets players pick what they want to unlock next, rather than forcing them down a linear path. You can buy all kinds of guns and all kinds of attachments for those guns, but you probably won't even bother because as it stands, the weapon balance isn't too great. SMGs are the clear best choice, with the MP5 being unlocked from the onset, a solid weapon that most of the player base is sticking with. There's no real reason to use assault rifles because they're basically a less powerful version of the SMGs. The snipers are impossible to use with the rampant frame rate inconsistencies, but I've at least seen some people using the shotguns, and have moderate success with them. As it stands, there are a few different game modes, but at least for me it was hard to find a match in anything other than the standard team deathmatch. They just recently added 2 new maps to the game in addition to the maybe 4 or so that they already have. I have to admit the maps aren't all that great. Most of them are on the small side, and the spawning system in conjunction with the sometimes poor map flow will lead to teams finding themselves spawn trapped and unable to do anything about it. First Assault Online is a solid base for improvements to be made upon. It's not flawed at its core, and if the proper adjustments are made and a few more maps are added, I can see this game becoming quite decent for when it's finished and made free to play. However, I can't in good faith, at all, recommend that you buy this game for the $5 or more while it's still in early access. The lack of enough maps to play without getting bored, and the abysmal performance are issues too grave to justify that $5 purchase. If this game looks or sounds interesting to you, my recommendation would be to add it to your Steam wishlist and wait for it to become free to play.